following are events from Reddit. Events so scary you wish they were only in your nightmares. Viewer discretion is advised.
When I was younger, my dad built me a treehouse out of my backyard. It was something that I've wanted for a few years. I couldn't wait for him to actually build it. I loved that thing. I could see the water from the treehouse. We had a rope swing and a slide. I loved that thanks so much that I even told my dad I want to sleep in it. Being in the country, he allowed it. Our neighbors were in eyesight, but by no means were they ever close. Our property was pretty big, and it was nice to kind of get away during the summertime. Remember the first few nights I actually slept in the treehouse. It was perfect. Waking up to the fresh air, staying warm in my sleeping bag, I really did feel safe. Until about the third night in. There was only one way into the treehouse, and that was through her ladder that led to a trap door. I think my dad built it this way because, well, I was in the treehouse. He didn't want me to fall out. The third night I was in the treehouse, I could remember hearing something outside. Originally I just thought it was my dad coming to check on me, which would it be too unexpected. Instead of coming up, I could hear just rustling around at the base of the tree. I thought it might be an animal, and so I didn't really care. There's no way a coyote was going to crawl up that ladder and come get me, so I wasn't worried at all. And then I hear the ladder. Figuring it's just my dad coming to check on me, I don't even move. I hear the door open. After about 30 seconds I realize my dad didn't say anything. As I roll over to look at the door, I see these two eyes staring at me. Absolutely petrified in fear, I couldn't believe the door quickly slammed shut. And I would like to tell you I remember hearing the person or the thing run off, but I heard your silence. I was kind of sleepy at that time, so I was trying to decide if I really saw something off my mind was playing tricks on me. But then it hit me. The man was probably still standing on that ladder. I do the foolish thing and I muster up the courage to slowly walk over. I moved so slow and so light on my feet, and there was no way the man could hear that I was coming. I remember how terrified I was standing over the door. I was hoping that when I opened it I could scare him and that he would run off. I slammed the door open and looked down. There was no one there. At this point I convinced myself that was just all in my head, literally having a little laugh to myself. I went back to enjoying my treehouse. I fall asleep and probably wake up a few hours later when the sun rises. I felt like a little kid who had bought his first house and had his own place, where no one could disrupt him. It was a level of independence that I never felt. I woke up and I looked down at the lake, which was crystal clear and absolutely beautiful, and I thought to myself, what a perfect life. I stayed there for a little bit, just kind of keeping warm in my blanket, before I would go into the house to have breakfast with my dad. I walk in my house and say, "Hey Dad, what's for breakfast?" Which I got no response. I went through the house looking for him, and I couldn't find him anywhere. I went out to the garage and that's when I found it. They were blood streaks from the garage out to the driveway. It looks like somebody had been dragged. Remember screaming for help, but being that far out in the country nobody could hear me. I can see my neighbors burn off in the distance, and I start running for it. I get there in a panic and the older man who on the farm told me to take a deep breath, and then together we would find my dad. I told him about the garage and he said nonsense, it's likely truck fluid or some other thing on the ground, and there was no need to get in a panic. Actually believed them at this time. I figured I was still young and there's probably something I didn't know. As we were driving over to my place I remember thinking maybe my dad just went out to grab some groceries. After all, I did come in for breakfast. We get back to the garage and the farmer looks on the ground, slowly taking his head off and scratching his head. He looks confused and asked if we have a phone. We did. He went in and called the police, which I guess took them about an hour to get out to the property. That was the last day I ever saw my dad. Unfortunately, I'm left with more questions than answers. Was it my dad that appeared through the treehouse door? Did that even happen? Or was it something worse, like my dad's killer looking me straight in the eyes? Growing up I had a horrible case of sleepwalking. As a sleepwalker I have to tell you, you don't remember much. Which is good. For the most part everything was fine. I really didn't even believe I was was a sleepwalker for the longest time. It wasn't till one day I woke up sitting in the armchair, with my last thoughts of going to sleep in my bed. It was kind of the moment where I realized maybe I am a sleepwalker, and my parents weren't just joking. I would mumble things in my sleep, but for the most part not say actual words. My parents always said this was unsettling, but again I don't remember any of it. Things got a little more severe when I was in high school. I had a pretty big growth spurt, went from being about 5'6" to 6'2". Also got a lot stronger at this point. It wasn't till high school, where I started moving things in my sleep. Nothing bad, I just moved the couch around, opened the cupboard doors. I'm sure it was unsettling for my parents, but I always thought there was no harm in what I was doing, especially because they saw me do it. It was around the time her dog started getting really sick of things change. He got really skinny and wasn't really eating, but he would drink a lot of water. It was like he couldn't control himself, he had to go to the bathroom instantly, as opposed to wait and go outside. That day the dog peed on my shoes. I got so upset I yelled at him and he ran off. I was filled with rage, just pure angry. I woke up the next day with some scratches on my arms, and one scratched by my collarbone. They were definite scratches, but they weren't bad enough to have made me bleed. I wasn't sure if it was bed bugs or what happened, but I woke up in my bed, which is where I went to sleep. As I sat up in my bed I could hear my mom scream, and if you've never heard a scream that is genuine, you might not understand what it sounds like. But the scream was one that haunts me to this day. There's a difference between screaming as an actor and screaming because some things genuinely terrifies you. When you scream as a reaction and it's genuine, I can't really describe what that sounds like. I sprinted out of my bed around the corner through the door to the backyard to see where my mom was. And that's when I saw it. Our dog had been hanging in the tree by its paws. Its front right leg was barely even hanging on. I think the skin was the only thing keeping it from dangling there. And the head was completely torn off. This was a deliberate act, not a mistake. To this day I don't know if I've done it in my sleep, and I was just pissed off. Or somebody had attacked our dog. My ex-boyfriend was a military personnel with a very secretive upbringing. I kind of always liked that about him. He had mentioned to me many times that he couldn't talk about his past, and that his role in the military was about getting other people to talk. But he never alluded to anything other than this. Every time I tried to get more out of them, you could see how serious it get, so I generally left it alone. I figured he had done some things that he wasn't proud about, and I always try to comfort him about that. War is a messed up thing. Anyone who knows some who's gone through war knows it's best to leave things alone. I mentioned he was my ex. He was an ex for a reason. I always felt that he spent too much time by himself to be left alone with his own thoughts, which he likely was reliving those moments he wasn't proud about. I tried to talk to him about this several times, but was never successful. After about 3 years together it got really bad. He didn't seem to listen to any logic, he seemed to be very emotional, and he convinced himself that people were coming for him. And unlike the movies where you stick with your man through everything, I did not. I hit my own breaking point and left him. He was convinced there was only one of two things happening here. Either they had gotten to me and convinced me to leave him, or I had found another man. Neither of which were true, but he refused. Do you understand my side of the picture? I wasn't happy. I have a lot of stress anxiety being around him. I felt like a failure because I wasn't able to help him after years of trying. And that eventually I have my own breaking point, and I want to live my own life. I didn't want this to be my life. I know people like the story of a couple that falls in love, and they stick through it throughout everything. But the man I fell in love with was not the man I was dating anymore. What happened next is the reason I don't sleep well. After I moved out I began seeing his car across the street for me every few days. I knew it's his car because I need a license plate. And that time, I would still call him and just let them know I knew he was there, and it's okay. And we both were going to learn to live our new lives. But I got really bad. Remember one night hearing like somebody had broken into my house. My heart rate, I got that sinking feeling in my stomach, and I was too scared to get out of bed, grab my phone to call the police. Eventually I did and found out that whoever had broken and also left really quickly. I have absolutely no proof that it was him. I could have been some other person, but judging everything that happened up to that, he was the only guy expected that might have done it. I didn't tell the police this because I still did want the best for him. A few nights had passed and it was late, so I went to bed. fell asleep like any other night. But when I woke up, I was sitting strapped to a chair. I was in a very dark room, and there was a light shining right on my face. I was pretty much blind, but I could see the outline of a person standing in front of me. He began to speak to me, but he had some sort of voice changer on because I had absolutely no clue what he would really sound like. He sounded almost robotic. The first question they asked me was what was my name. I told them, and they said okay. Second question they asked me was where do I live. I didn't answer that question, which the person snapped my head back, opened my mouth, and shoved their fingers well down my throat. At least I thought it was their fingers. I tried to bite down, but he had my head pinned back, and my jaw pinned so strong I couldn't overcome it. I was petrified. I started answering every question they asked me. All the basic questions: where do I live? What are my parents' names? How long have I lived there? I answered and had no issue. But when it came down to who I've been having sex with, he didn't believe me. The man took out what looked to be a needle, very fine needle. He asked me again and I said nobody. He began to take the needle and shove it up under my fingernails. I've never felt pain like that before. I must have blacked out. I woke up in his hellhole again. I don't know what this man wanted, but I answered those questions truthfully as I could, and I was being tortured for it. At one point he held my eyes open and shined the light directly in them. Again, the pain was so bad I can't even imagine. It's made my head ring and I felt nauseous. I don't know how long this continued, but I could see the man put something into the needle this time, some sort of fluid. I watched him walk towards me, and then around me to the left side. And as he did this, I could see two other people step out of the shadows towards me. That was the last memory I had. I woke up in my bed, my throat, my fingernails were in excruciating pain. I went to the bathroom and looked down my throat to try to figure out if I could see any marks, and I couldn't. There was a little bit of blood under my fingernails, but the actual marking of where the needle was put was so small you can barely tell. I'm not sure what happened that night. I don't know if it was him, or the people he thought was after him. All I know is that he disappeared, and we still have not spoken since. I was always a light sleeper. Every little sound or movement in my room or wake me up instantly. It's a pretty normal for me, so I thought nothing of it. I had recently moved into a new apartment. I called apartment because there's several people living there. But it was more like a house. I just had extra rooms to be rented. For the most part everybody seemed nice. There were 2 rooms where I never actually met the people that lived there. It was almost like a myth whether those people existed or not. We shared a common kitchen, and that's when we would all discuss the other roommates. I was really enjoying my time. Everybody was pretty friendly, and we keep things light-hearted. Remember one time we were discussing one of the roommates, and Jeff, who lived there, said one of the guys was a total creep. The man was tall but very slender. He only weighed about 120-130 pounds. One day Jeff saw this guy barely peering out his door. He thought he was waiting for Jeff to leave before he would leave his room. The way he told the story was very creepy. So this put me on edge. As you can imagine, an older house like that made a lot of noise. So I would wake up consistently throughout the night. Again, this was common, so nothing to be worried about, right? When I woke up because I heard some noise in the roof, but it wasn't like a house creaking. It sounded like there must have been an animal out there. Something was crawling around. I had the owner of the property go up to the attic to look around, but they couldn't find anything. This happened a few more nights, and each time it seemed things got a little louder, but that might have just been my paranoia. There is a vent, is that right over my bed, but as I lay there I would look up at. That event is where most of my terrors today come from. One day I woke up because the house was creaking, but what I heard after that terrified me. Coming from the vents with the sound of a man moaning. Lightly moaning, it wasn't loud, but because I was awake it was very noticeable. I was too scared to move, my legs frozen, my arms frozen by my side. I didn't know what was going on. I was finally able to say something out loud. I don't remember what I said, but instantly the meaning stopped. After a few seconds I was able to sit up in my bed. And I asked myself, was I dreaming? I was probably awake for another 45 minutes. And I didn't hear any other moaning, so eventually I got back to sleep even though it wasn't a great sleep. It wasn't the last time I heard the moaning. Every few nights I would hear the moaning, and it got loud off at some point. It actually woke me up out of one of my sleeps. As I woke up the other moaning stopped. I wasn't sleeping much, and this is why I was doubting myself. What is this, my head playing games on me? Was I actually hearing something? I honestly couldn't tell. I would ask the other housemates about it, and none of them heard anything. This is what led me to believe nothing was going on, it was all in my head. But the moaning would get louder. One night I was lying there asleep. The moaning woke me up. I kept my eyes shut. But I really listened to the sound. Well, I could hear the moaning. I asked myself it was real. Am I conscious right now? I'm definitely awake, and I can definitely hear that there is no way that this is my mind playing games on me. I opened my eyes and I saw something that gives me chills even writing about it now. In the vent in my ceiling, I could see beady little glowing eyes staring right at, while the moaning was louder than I ever heard before. I couldn't move. It was like a fear had to stop all of my ability to function, and I was forced just to stare at these eyes. The man I was staring at slowly, and I mean slowly, began to work his way back into the vents. I couldn't move. I don't know for how long. All I know is that eventually I was able to set up, and I began to go knock on all the neighbors' doors. I woke everyone up because I only felt safe around everyone. At the same time, the creepy man from down the hallway opened his door and asked what was going on. I looked at him dead in the eyes and began to question myself. Was that the man that was looking down at me? I don't know if I'm crazy, if I'm seeing things in my sleep, or if there's a creepy man across an event that night to watch me. All I do know is I need help. What do you get when you mix medication, alcohol, and a low-income neighborhood? You get me. This might be my last post on Reddit. Things just aren't going my way. My doctor told me not to mix the medication and alcohol, but like I told him, I'm an alcoholic. There's no stopping me at this point. I don't know if I want to stop. I'm so angry all the time. I feel like people don't listen to me, and I feel like I'm on the edge. The medication throws me way off. I feel out of place. I feel like I'm living a dream, that I'm actually asleep, but I know it's real life. Throw some alcohol and some emotional issues, and that's where the story comes from. One of the side effects of my medication is nosebleeds. I get nosebleeds all times a day, and I just have to deal with him. This has been happening for the last few months, so even though I don't like them, I feel like I'm used to them. 2 days ago I woke up my hands and face covered in blood. Went to the bathroom, some of the blood, most of it had already dried. I'm watching the blood off my damn hands, and I'm looking at my face is covered in blood, so annoyed that my sheets are ruined. As I'm washing myself, I can hear my neighbor screaming. This just angered me. I get clean and head to hallway to see what she's screaming at. I open the door and I find that she's holding our cat, who is still alive, but clearly missing a tail. That's when I notice it. There's a blood trail from my front door to my bed. Quickly I close the door. I'm looking through my house, looking for that tail. But I couldn't find it. Did I bite that tail off? Is that why there says blood on my face? Where the tail now? Guys, I'm going crazy. How could I be that messed up to do something like this? Did I do something like this? Or is it just another nosebleed? Edit. I woke up in the hallway today. So I know I'm not conscious of where I fall asleep and what I do. Well, I black out. Still trying to figure it out. Second edit. I bit the tail, I know it. I came to and was chewing on one of the only books I own. Why does the meds do this with me? Final edit. I'm not sure what happened. The police were called and they took me away. The doctor there said if I was an alcoholic I shouldn't be taking that medication. They prescribed me something different. The meds I was on mixed with alcohol can easily produce hallucinations. What is it all just a dream? I still find cat hair on some of my clothes.